Right. Remember Burnout? EA paid $68 million for the studio that built it. Within 9 years, they had reduced that studio from 500 people to just 17. The two founders who created it walked out, started over, built the same game twice, but they could never call it Burnout because EA owns that name. And EA has not made a Burnout game since 2011. They are doing nothing with it. They will not sell it. They just own it. And here is the part EA never explained. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway. Most people think Burnout just faded out, that the genre moved on, that it was nobody's fault. That version of events is wrong. This is the full story, and it is worse than you remember. But to understand how EA destroyed it, you first need to understand what they actually bought. Because what Criterion built was not just a racing game, it was a philosophy. And nobody at EA ever really understood that. Two people built Burnout from nothing, Alex Ward and Fiona Sperry, a creative director and a studio director, working out of Guildford, England in the late 1990s as part of Criterion Software, a company that built game engines. Not games, engines. But Alex had one idea, a simple one. Every racing game on the market punished you for crashing. What if crashing was the point? Not a penalty, not a failure state. The crash was the reward. Slow motion, glass everywhere, metal folding at 150 miles an hour, 6 camera angles, all replayed in beautiful, deliberate destruction. That was Burnout. And the first time anyone saw it, they forgot they were supposed to be racing. Burnout 1 and 2 were published by Acclaim. Decent sales, cult following, but Acclaim was struggling financially and could not market them properly. Then came Burnout 3, Takedown, in 2004. EA stepped in as publisher, and everything changed. Burnout 3 sold over 2.3 million copies in the US alone. Metacritic, 94. It was aggressive, loud, cinematic, and completely unlike anything else on the market. People were deliberately losing races just to trigger the crash replays. That is not a game mechanic, that is art. EA watched those numbers, watched the reviews, watched the fans, and in 2004, they made a decision. They bought Criterion outright, $68 million, lock, stock, and every line of code. And for a few years, it actually worked. EA buying Criterion felt like a good thing at the time. More resources, better marketing, wider distribution. And for a while, it was. Burnout Revenge shipped in 2005, Burnout Paradise in 2008, an open-world reinvention that sits at Metacritic 88 to this day. At their peak, Criterion had approximately 500 developers working out of a single building in Guildford. 500 people, all working on games that Alex and Fiona had spent a decade building from scratch. And here is where the first crack appeared. Around 2008 or 2009, Criterion, almost as a joke, asked EA if they could work on a Need for Speed game. Need for Speed was a mess at this point, bouncing between studios, losing identity. EA said yes, and that single casual question, asked as a joke, is the moment the clock started ticking on Burnout. Because once EA saw what Criterion could do with Need for Speed, they never really let them go back. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit shipped in 2010. Metacritic, 89. Commercial success. Criterion had done it again. EA rewarded them by giving them the entire Need for Speed franchise. On paper, this looked like a promotion. In reality, it was a slow suffocation, because Criterion was now responsible for 2 franchises simultaneously, and Burnout had not had a new game since 2011. Not a sequel, not a spin-off, nothing. The franchise that built them had been quietly set aside while they fixed EA's other problem. Alex Ward noticed. He started talking about it publicly. In April 2013, he announced on Twitter that Criterion was steering away from racing games entirely. That tweet was a warning. Nobody listened. Because 2 months after that tweet, EA made a decision that didn't just sideline Burnout. It effectively ended Criterion, as the studio Alex and Fiona had spent 15 years building, and they did it in a single afternoon. On the 13th of September 2013, EA transferred 80% of Criterion's developers to a newly formed studio called Ghost Games UK. 80%, 70 people, gone in one day. The studio that had peaked at 500 developers was reduced to 17 people overnight. 17. Alex Ward broke the news himself on Twitter. No corporate statement, no press release. Just a developer telling the world that the studio he built had been hollowed out in an afternoon. EA's official response was that Criterion would be working on something new. Ghost Games would take over Need for Speed. Everyone was fine. Everyone was not fine. Because 4 months later, both founders were gone. And what they did next tells you everything about what EA had actually taken from them. On the 3rd of January 2014, Alex Ward and Fiona Sperry announced they had left Criterion. EA's statement was 4 sentences long. They appreciated their contributions. They wished them well. 2 months later, Alex and Fiona announced 3 Fields Entertainment, a tiny independent studio, just them and a handful of former Criterion developers. And here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. They spent the next several years building spiritual successors to Burnout: Dangerous Golf, Danger Zone, Danger Zone 2, Dangerous Driving, each one carrying the same DNA, same crash physics, same philosophy, same soul. But they could never call any of them Burnout because EA owns that name, and EA has not used it since 2011. Now here is where it gets even worse. After the founders left, the skeleton crew remaining at Criterion started developing a new racing game, the biggest game they had ever attempted, Burnout Roots, brand new IP. EA canceled it in 2016 without explanation. 2 years of work, gone. No reason given publicly. The people who built Burnout had already left. The people who tried to continue it had their game canceled. And EA still owns the name, the IP, and every piece of code ever written. They are doing nothing with it. And here is the final twist in this story, the one that makes everything that came before it feel almost deliberate. Ghost Games, the studio EA built with Criterion's own developers. They made 4 Need for Speed games between 2013 and 2019. The last one, Payback, landed at Metacritic 60 with aggressive microtransactions and a fan backlash that EA could not ignore. By 2019, EA had quietly handed Need for Speed back to Criterion. The studio they gutted in 2013 was now responsible for cleaning up the mess that the studio built from its own developers had created. Criterion shipped Need for Speed Unbound in 2022. Then, in August 2025, EA renamed their website, Criterion, a battlefield studio, not a racing studio, not the home of Burnout, a battlefield support team. No Burnout, no Need for Speed, just support work on someone else's game. This is not incompetence. Incompetence is random. What happened here follows a pattern that appears across EA's history with relentless consistency. Burnout sacrificed for Need for Speed. Medal of Honor sacrificed for Battlefield. Dead Space retooled until the studio closed. Pandemic Studios, Black Box, Visceral Games. The formula is always the same. Buy the studio, use the talent, redirect the talent to a different problem. Watch the original franchise die from neglect. Never sell the IP, just own it. Alex Ward and Fiona Sperry are still making games at Three Fields Entertainment. Small games, indie scale, nothing close to the budgets they had at Criterion. In 2018, they wrote a full history of Burnout on their own website. Every detail, every decision, their own words. They called it Pedal to the Metal, the history of Burnout, because nobody else was going to tell it accurately. The last Burnout game ever made, Burnout Paradise, is still available on PC, still runs, still brilliant, still the best crash physics ever put into a racing game. EA released a remaster of it in 2018. They did not ask Criterion to make it. They gave it to a different studio entirely. Alex and Fiona had already left by then. Some franchises get canceled, some get rebooted badly, some get erased entirely. Burnout got something rarer, and somehow worse. It got owned.